All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, Tina and Stacy-Ann, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. Really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you. So exciting to be here.
Thank you for having us, Danielle.
Well, I feel like I've gotten to know each of you just a little bit and Prospect a little bit, but I want to start with some quick intros. So both of you are operations experts or gurus on our conversation today. And so I feel like it's important to ask where you both came from to Prospect Schools. I know you're both relatively new to the network. And I'd also love to specifically hear kind of where you cut your teeth on operations, where you developed your skill sets. And Stacy-Ann, why don't you kick us off?
So yes, I love all things operations. Before I joined Prospect, I was with Achievement First Charter Schools. And I want to say that's where I've learned a good chunk of my operational expertise and just leadership lens. Prior to AF, I was living in Jamaica and I worked on a couple projects that needed those skills, such as like the Prime Minister Youth Awards and the Jamaica Grand Gala. So I dabbled a little bit there before coming to Achievement First, but I started as a hallway monitor at AF. So pretty much from the bottom of the operations chain all the way to the top. And that's where most of my skills to be leading operations with Prospect comes from.
Awesome. And what about you, Tina?
Yeah, prior to coming to Prospect Schools, I was actually at Uncommon Schools, so the other big charter network from AF. And I spent a good amount of years there, 8 years. I started as an associate dean of students at Prospect Schools, and then, slowly made my way to the Ops Fellowship that Uncommon offers. My Ops Fellowship was cut short, transitioned straight to roll to a middle school in Canarsie, and I launched a school in the middle of a pandemic, If there's any best teacher, the pandemic was the best teacher for me to teach me all things operations and like how to really operate a school like thoughtfully, like with like head and heart. And so, yeah, here I am. Now I'm at Prospect Schools with Stacy-Ann.
Fantastic. Trial by fire, right?
Right.
Well, both of you come from very large, well-developed, established networks, Achievement First, Uncommon Schools. Both organizations have a, fantastic reputation. A lot of folks in the ops community have heard about, maybe the Uncommon Schools Operations Fellowship or some of the things these networks have developed over the years. What was the draw for you all? And maybe what was the context that you both ended up at Prospect? Tina, maybe you can go first on this one.
Yeah, I think for me, like Prospect Schools, Uncommon was amazing and they had so many schools. But I think the draw for me for Prospect was, they only had 6 schools at that time. And, when I joined. And for me, like that was a draw. I'm like, oh my God, I get to like really like fine tune the operations at Prospect Schools and partner with Yoni and SAB and really like take operations to the next level. And I really saw an opportunity there. I think like another thing that I love about Prospect Schools is like, they are just like diverse by design. Like every single school at Prospect is very diverse. Like you see a white kid, a black kid, a brown kid in a classroom. And like, you don't see that in many schools in Brooklyn, and it's so cool that like kids get to interact with each other and like they're different and diverse. And I love that Prospect School stands by like that diversity.
For me, I think it all just fell in place. I had no intentions of like leaving where I was. I was I was okay, I had a great coach and all of that. I think a great opportunity presented itself for me to lend those skills elsewhere. And after researching Prospect and learning more about it, the draw really was what Tina just mentioned, the diverse by design. Clearly, I am a Black woman, so any of that work will appeal to me. Additionally, when I looked into Prospect, I looked at their being a Caribbean woman, I looked at their results and their scores and how they perform, and visiting the school and seeing the level of high rigor, but such joy. It wasn't as, robotic or so structured or looked militant. It still had a blend of this joy, but still the scores were like, ooh, the kids may have been, but no, it had a really nice balance. So in addition to the diversity, you saw the scores that you needed. You see the outcome for the students. And that also was like, you know what, maybe I should just give this a try. And I've been seeing it since I've been there every single time I step into the classrooms every week.
And Stacy-Ann, what was because I know you got to Prospect shortly before Tina. Tina, you alluded to Yoni as well. What was the operations team structure at the time? Because today our topic we're going to be diving into is sort of building out operations infrastructure for a growing network. So what was it like when you first got there, just in terms of the team and the, either school level leaders or network level leaders?
Yeah. So when I got there, Yoni was just our COO. He was just finishing his first year trying to do that change management around operations and putting in some structure. So basically what I learned that the understanding of ops was very unclear in Prospect schools. From school to school, you may see something very different, where one school may have 4 or 5 different ops team with different titles, and another one, it was a different thing. So there was where he made that clear, very structured across the board, same roles, same titles. There was a need for ops coaching and development. So here we come. So he also made that a part of his change management, to have ops be led by operational experts to make sure that they're growing and developing, and making sure that there was clearly established systems. So when I joined, he was just at the tail end of digging into the systems. Like, he hired the development, he did the title and the overhaul of roles, but he was just getting into like, now I have you. Let's talk about making these systems more clear and more defined to help our people on the ground.
I think this is really important because this scenario is pretty common, especially in places where there are, large metropolitan areas where there are growing networks, where maybe the network has 3 to 7 schools. They have one chief operating officer, and then at each of the individual sites, there might be an embedded ops leader. But as the network is growing, it quickly becomes clear that there's these challenges that you alluded to, Stacy-Ann, around, systematizing things, developing standard operating procedures, even speaking the same language amongst the schools. And so I'm really excited to kind of unpack that more with both of you, because I know this is the work you're doing currently, you're enmeshed in right now. So introducing change is obviously always a daunting task. It sounds like something your COO kind of had to lead the charge on, whether it be, systems and processes or new expectations, or even getting coaching that can be new. So where did you all start? Maybe Stacy-Ann, you could kick us off on this one, because I know this is one of the key things you were brought in to do. What was that process like? And then Tina, I want to get into, some of the specifics that you all have been working on.
Yeah. So I think I started with like clarifying the need at hand, right? I spent a lot of time with Yoni getting as much context about the network as possible, specifically operations, hearing the woes of the people on the ground, like how they've been doing and what their biggest challenges were. I feel like the first 3 months I spent listening. If I redo that, I'll probably spend a little less time, but I spent first 3 months just listening to all, not just the leaders, not just the DSOs, but the operations teams. I had skip levels with people as well, just to try to hear the experiences, what they wanted to do better, how to maximize the resources that they had, and how to streamline them. And I used that what they shared with me with the resources I got from AF, the learnings I took from AF, and see how it may or not work. I got buy-in from them by like, here's what I'm thinking. Give me input, give me thoughts. So I did a lot of that. I invested them in the work as well because we brought them into the conversation, not just made a decision to say, here's the thing. A lot of listening, getting the clarity for change, and then thought about what resources I have, what learnings I have from AF, how can it work or not work for Prospect, and getting feedback and input from the stakeholders on the ground. That's pretty much where I started.
So Tina, maybe you could give us an example of this, because I know you and Stacy-Ann partner closely on this work. And each of you, I would imagine, came in with, preconceived systems and processes from your former networks. What was it like? Maybe if you could think of an example or two of evaluating how something was done today and thinking about, whether or not there was an opportunity to introduce a new system or change. Maybe you could expound on that a little bit.
Well, I came in actually, I didn't share this before, but I joined Prospect Schools as a director of network operations prior.
Mhm.
I was not a senior director of operations. I actually was a director of network operations. So my job was actually to oversee like the network operations and like work with like cross-functional teams to make sure that people on the ground was supported operationally. So this is a good question because like when I first came in as a DNO, I did spend a lot of time listening to cross-functional teams, right? And like listening to the need. And that was almost like a disconnect, right? Like people in the network wanted certain things and wanted certain metrics and like successes. And like people on the ground wanted the same, but like they were not connecting. And so an example of that was state exams, right? When I came in, there was no structured process or system to how to execute state exams, how to gather the data on state exams, how to share the data on state exams. So what I did was I actually like worked with our teaching and learning team to kind of figure out what they needed, right? What data they needed and what processes that were like non-negotiable for them. And then like brought their systems to schools, put it in like a dashboard, made a system in place, had a rollout, right? Like on Zoom with all DSOs, highlighted like key milestones that they needed to deliver, and then like created like a dashboard where DSOs drop their like data, like just copy paste drop. So like we have that data. And then there was just like, what we also did was just also add like systems of like pickup exams and drop off exams. There was just like no systems for that either. So like from like everything, right? From like data down, like to like picking up and dropping off exams and how that looks and like creating a testing hub. What does a testing hub look like? So Stacy and I worked a lot on that. State exams is like one thing that I think about that comes to mind because like from the input that I got was prior years, it was just no systems in place. People didn't even know about testing hubs or like how to like do it in an organized way. And I think that the tricky part about state exams this past year was that we added the computer-based testing too. So like how do you make computer-based testing also like organized and seamless without any qualms, right? So like we made sure we worked with the data and IT team to make sure like all the computers on the ground were like really well like connected and like they were like tested weeks before and days before. We worked with a special projects manager to make sure that they understood the systems behind supporting the tech for state exams. So like we did a lot of change for the state exams, and I would say that that was like I think the biggest like system that seemed like really organized that like I introduced as a director of network operations.
I think state testing is a great example because, like you all said, the process is you go and listen to what's going on at the organization. What are some of the challenges? And then freshly introducing, okay, we're going to unbundle all the various components of this and we're going to build a process for it and we're going to share that process. And you're developing a system that can then be repeated the next year and improved upon. I wanted to go back to one of the things, Stacy-Ann, you said earlier, which was clarifying what even operations covered or like what operations even means was an important part of the initial work. And I think state testing is also, ties into that because some people would say state testing, that doesn't sound like an operations thing. That's that maybe that's an academic thing. Or I thought operations people just did food service and transportation. And some of that is just because at each school it is a little bit different. And so I wanted to ask about defining the work. How have you all thought about actually defining and clarifying what falls under operations versus a different department? And how have you all had to partner with other departments to kind of clarify, no, this is actually an operations thing. We will own this and we'll partner with you on it versus this is your thing and maybe we can support you on it. A common challenge amongst all teams. I'd love maybe just to get some thoughts from each of you on that. Stacy-Ann, why don't we start with you?
I was about to say, Tina, you should take this one. That is a challenge we face, Daniel.
It is,
That's why I told Tina.
I think that like one key thing that like I want to say here is Stacy-Ann and I both, because of our experiences, we do have like a set vision on what success looks like. Right. And so I think like it kind of makes the job of change easier because we have that vision for success. We know what good state exams look like. We know what a good lunch system looks like. Right. I think going into this and thinking about that in the back of our head and then accepting it for what is and slowly shaping the process to get to 100%. I think that's how we approach it. And so in thinking about how we define what's operations and what's not, it is a work in progress, Daniel, because a lot of things automatically people think, hey, it's operations, but really it's a data and IT thing, right? And so how do we then bring on our cross-functional team, have really transparent discussions on hey, this is operations, but this is entirely a data and IT thing. We have no expertise here. We have no idea how to code this. This belongs to you, right? And really name that and be transparent with that. And then touch base with our teams and make sure that both of us are meeting our milestones. I think it's really, really important. And we've had to do a lot of that work, not with just our data and IT team, but also with the DNO, my previous role, I owned property management and security services because we hire private companies to do that at our schools. Really thinking through, is the DNO the right person to hold these two work? Tina has no idea what an ejector bit is. Tina has no idea what paint quality is. Am I the right expert? Is that really operations one? And am I the right expert in this role? Is there another expert at our network team that can totally own this and win this for all our schools, right? And the answer to that question is yes. We have a whole real estate team, right? And Matt, our senior director of real estate, he knows our buildings two and through. He's been here for 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
We did that work. We met with the real estate team. We brought the problem, right? The problem is Tina is not an expert. Stacy-Ann is not an expert. We have no idea what painting and pipes and sinks are, and our DSOs don't know that either. And we can't expect them to know things like that about the building.
Right.
So we did that work on partnering with them, really being transparent and hey, you guys are the experts, and we trust you with this work and let's work together to make sure that we really define who owns what and what is operations and what is real estate. And we are continuing to do that work. Stacy-Ann, I don't know whether you want to add.
I wanted to say that we're continuing to do that work. Daniel, you name it's a growing network and it's going to get larger. And as it gets larger, there will be change that comes. And there are moments where Tina are maybe this is ops, but right now we don't have the knowledge to get this thing done as best as it could for the outcome for our children. So maybe if we tap into Laura from data, say, hey, this IC error happened. I know IC is currently on their ops right now, but Tina and I don't know how to go that far into IC. Can you fix this? And we literally had that 2 weeks ago with a glitch at my high school. And I reached out and I was like, hey, I know this is currently on their ops and we're having discussions where it falls. But for right now, I think you're the best person because you have the knowledge. Can you help us solve this? So there's a lot of cross-functional work that still happens. And one of the things I also think about, not only who's the expert and who does it well, what does it take to get to the outcome of this goal that we're trying to achieve? Is it logistics? Does it need a system? Right? And if it's a different team and it does have a system, the lens that I have may look very different from the lens another cross-functional team have. So I can partner with them okay, you have a system, probably not the most airtight one. What if you did it this way? This could get to a better outcome. So I think there's still a lot of but I do think Yoni did the bulk of the work to clarify ops on the ground. I think at the network level, because we're so small, we're still trying to figure out where everything falls, because even though IT is IT, Yoni still oversees IT, so somewhat it's still operations. So that is still a work in progress, but for the clarity on the ground, that's there. But how does this impact instruction? Does this allow our teachers or directors and our principals to focus on instruction? Okay, then we'll figure it out over here and put systems in place because this is all logistics and we are the owner of that, is one of the ways I've always thought about operations as well.
Really, really helpful feedback. And I think there's a couple really important questions, self-reflective questions in there for others in operations who might be listening. What is it going to take to actually produce the outcome we're looking for? And then are we even the expert at this? Which I think is, it takes a lot of humility and, credit to you, Tina, for the example you shared of I'm not the real estate expert or I'm not the security expert. And we have other people who are. And so let's go partner with them to get to what success looks like. And I think those are, such quality questions to be constantly asking yourself as a team and also recognizing, like you said, Stacy-Ann, this is an ongoing process. It's not going to get solved overnight. So let's talk a little bit about clarifying the work is an important part of putting structure in place. That's an ongoing process. I'm sure even after there is some semblance of this is what ops owns, the next question is kind of division of labor. Even if certain things were, handed off to another team, there's still this really long list. There always is a really long list in the operations bucket. So how have you all thought about defining the work at an individual level amongst the operations team? And maybe you could speak to, yourselves as senior directors of operations at the network versus an operations manager at a local school. Could you all just speak to how operations kind of works together on division of labor, how you decide what's a network problem versus this is a decentralized operations thing that the school managers? Curious to just hear a little bit more on how you all have thought about that. Stacy-Ann, maybe you can take this
is
one.
Also a work in progress, FYI. we're working on it right now. We're getting better though.
Yeah, this is a very tricky question. I think once Yoni had went ahead and created like the titles and the roles, I think this year, thank God with Tina coming on as a senior director, we got very intentional about creating division of labor for people on the ground. So even though we had those titles of SPM, OCs, and registrar, we kind of have a high level of what they do, but sometimes there was an intertwining around, does SPM own this or the registrar own it because it's like communication or is it this platform? So I think this year, for the first year when we rolled out readiness, getting schools ready for the new year, Tina's like, a tab that we need to have is division of labor. We need our DSOs to tell us who on their team owns what. So that clarity helped us as the people managing DSOs. So we were clear on here's what they own on the ground at each site. And we try to make sure it was streamlined as much as possible. There's a little nuances, especially for the high school that has a larger ops team. But once we had that clarity on the ground, when we are at network, when the ask comes, it doesn't directly go straight to schools. It goes to us first, which is another system we kind of put in place where we're like, hey, here's where you're going to put all the things that you want school teams to do. And Tina and I will take a look at it, ask you any clarifying questions if we don't understand before we push it to schools, or if we don't believe it should go to schools because of whatever reason. Let's talk about how we can get to the goal of this thing that you want without giving it to schools. And one of my meters that I use to define that, as someone who has worked in schools, I think that has helped to our advantage to say, is this something doable? Like, what kind of challenges the school is going to face? Because I see my role as someone who takes the rocks off their road. And if this task is putting a rock on their road, maybe it's not for the school. So let's talk through what's the truest outcome you need, the timeline it needs to get done. That's also a big thing for me. Like, I believe in giving schools 2 weeks or more a turnaround time for any ask, because running a school and getting the things done is very challenging, as opposed to being at the network where you have all the time in the world uninterrupted because there's no kids running around you 24/7. There's no safety issues happening. There's no parents coming to talk to you. So I believe in ensuring that our school teams have ample time to get things done. So I use some of those things to define whether they should go to this teams. Do we give them enough time? Have we given them a system to do this effectively? And how does this best develop them? And do they have like all the context to create this work or to get this work done? Is some of the things I think we have ask ourselves before we give something to teams, and making sure that they have all the tools. Because transparently, sometimes I'm like, oh, there's no system for that. We need to write a SOP for this so they don't know how to do it. So maybe it's best that we not roll this out because we do not have a SOP for them to do it. And then we all have to go back to the drawing board. Tina, I don't know that.
Tina, you mentioned this is an ongoing process. What would you add to that as you think about, Stacy-Ann talked about this triage, almost like you all as triage for problems, and then, deciding whether or not some of those challenges belong to the local, school managers. What are you all working on right now? Is it building out more of those SOPs that you're uncovering are not documented? Kind of talk to us a little bit about where you're at in this process of kind of clarifying the division of labor throughout the operations org.
I think like for some context, Daniel, too, DSOs were actually given autonomy to kind of like make their owner, like divide labor at schools on the school ground.
And what's sorry, I should clarify for the listener, what's a DSO?
The director of the school operations.
Okay.
So directors of school operations were initially like they had autonomy to kind of like create their own DOL at like a school level. And so I know that like Yoni and Stacy-Ann, like she said before, like they did a lot of work in like making sure that like DOLs were very streamlined from like, our special projects manager all the way to our office coordinator. The reason why like it's so important to have like clarified division of labor is because like besides our director of school operations, we also want to grow our operations team. We want to make them experts in whatever they own, right? Like the same way like we believe that like the expert at the network should own like data, the expert at the school level should own communication, right? They should be like so good at communication that it'll be like, here, I'm going to send it, like one click, it's done. So we want to grow our team. We're so invested. And that's why like DOL, like having a clear division of labor at the school level is so important. So when I say it's still a work in progress, in our DOL currently, it's pretty like clear, right? Like special projects managers, like own the same thing across our schools. So for example, all special projects managers like own communication across schools. But then it's still kind of like, not clear when it comes to like our registrars and what they own, right? Like some registrars own testing data. Some registrars don't own testing data, right? And so like it's getting like more clear in those sense and getting like input from our schools teams on like, hey, what do your registrars actually do? Because we want to clarify this role because we want to grow our people, right? Like if a registrar at one school owns testing data and a registrar at another school does not, then like they will not have context when we think about like professional development to roll out to them. So that's why like I said, it's still a work in progress because it's really not, I want to say 85% there. We still need to get clear on like who owns what from like maybe the registrar level, maybe the special projects manager level. And that's just like, Stacy-Ann and I really like doing the work with Yoni to find out and figure out, hey, like what exactly do these teams own? Like, let's get clear because that's the first step in like making our teams like even more better.
So I want to build on this idea of, because I think this is a great transition into talking about building out a team culture of excellence. Because like you said, this isn't just about getting the work done. It's also about developing the team, the pipeline of operations leaders. Both of you were on the receiving end, I imagine, of strong operations leadership at AF and at Uncommon. So how have you thought about trying to build out some of that structure for your school operations leaders, whether it be from a PD perspective or a coaching perspective or a culture perspective? Maybe you could each talk just a little bit about some of the things that you're working on introducing or you've tried to introduce as far as team development structure goes.
I could get started. For me, I think I've replicated what I have experienced from AF, and coaching has been the biggest part, I think, of my development and my learning. I believe I was strongly poured into by my former coach, and that is something that I have dedicated myself to in stepping into the role. When I stepped into the role, that was one of the things like Yoni also shared, like there's this need for coaching and development for not just our directors of operations, but our school teams as well. So we currently have like DSO monthlies for our DSOs, and in the process of building ops team teams monthlies for our OCs and SPMs. But as it relates to my role and my directors of operations that I coach, that is a non-negotiable in our weekly meetings. That's a standing meeting every week. It's not all tactical or technical. Coaching is going to be in it. You're going to find something that we're going to coach on, and expecting to see it being replicated in their own coach meetings. So I'm an all up in your business coach. I am coming to your coach meetings. I am coming to your coach meetings to sit down and listen and give you, whether you want real time feedback, whether it's that me chatting you, hey, can you probe on this in your questioning, or you want to wait until the end that we debrief. That is something that consistently happens with me and my directors. I believe, as someone who coaches another leader, that you got to be very intentional, because they're already high performing. They're a leader for a reason.
Right.
So how are you going to make them even better to get to the next stage? This year, I proudly have a year one DSO in my cohort that I have coached while I was new last year. That is now a DSO. And that gives me joy. That's the thing I live for. So I take a lot of pride into doing that level of coaching. And then when Tina and I sit down to plan our DSO monthly, being very intentional, like what do our DSOs need to grow on and how can that benefit them to turn that to their team? So we've started DSO professional development already. We just did September's, which was on goal setting and developing your team. So we play no games over here with coaching, because we know what it does for us. And I know that is a passion of mine to keep that going consistently.
Tina, what are some of the ways that you think about developing professional development? So you all are introducing this, it's new. Obviously there's tactical things like one-on-ones with your direct reports. How do you all evaluate, like maybe we could use the September example of goal setting. How are you all developing the topics? Is this just based on feedback from the team? We want to work on this. Is this observational? Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So my background, Daniel, is behavior analysis. So like in behavior analysis, we have a term, it's in science in general. We take some baseline data, right? Like we want to see like where everyone is at. So Stacy-Ann and I went weekly, we talk about like, hey, where is everyone at? What are their like successes and where are they excellent at and what is their gap? So that's like the first question. And then like when thinking about like PDs, one thing that like we ask ourselves is like, hey, like what is like the whole network priority for like the month of September? What is the network asking like, people on the ground to like work on? So for September, for example, the people team rolled out the goal setting document. And then the question Stacy-Ann and I would ask is, okay, are they familiar with this document? Do they know how to collect this data on their ops teams? What tool can we introduce or design for them so it'll make like data collection on performance really easy and seamless? And then they will then like, have like a successful like transition into like completing this document for the network, right? And so like that's the process that we take. And then like based on that, like Stacy-Ann and I created like a tool for DSOs on how to like gather behavior data on performance, rolled it out to our directors in September monthly meeting, and they felt really like good about that. That's the feedback that we got. In thinking through like the scope of the year though, when you think through about that, like we also ask ourselves like, what's on the calendar for the year? Where do we need to intervene? Like, what do we need to teach them, show them? What operational, like, big rock is there existing in the month of October, right? October is, I believe, testing season, right? Our IAs. And so, like, what like skills do we need to build with our directors so they feel confident in running a really seamless IAs? Do we need to do walkthroughs? Do we need to give them a project plan? What do we need to do? And so like that's an example of how we think through like, developing skill with our directors.
So it's a combination of both gathering data on what the team needs at a functional level, but also thinking, a couple steps ahead about what the organization needs and can we build skill sets to ensure that we're successful in the actual work. So let's get to, as we come to a wrap here, I want to ask about some specific learnings for both of you as you reflect on, you've mentioned throughout the conversation, this is an ongoing process. This is not perfect. We're working on this every single day, which is one of the reasons I was excited to have you all on. I imagine, even though this is, new-ish work, there have been some great learnings along the way. I forget if it was which one of you said it, but even I think it was you, Stacy-Ann, about like talking to the team. You kind of made a side comment about next time I might not have taken quite so long to talk to the team. I want to hear some more on the learnings front. So as you two reflect on partnering together on this work, what recommendations would you have for basically your counterparts who maybe recently got hired at a small growing network? A COO brought them in to build out kind of this infrastructure that would allow the operations function to scale. What kind of general recommendations come to mind? Either one of you can start on this one.
I can get started. So, Daniel, I just got into a COO fellowship for a year-long fellowship. And one of the things that we needed to do was to gather data on our leadership, a 360 data from my manager, my direct reports, and my peers. And while the data is anonymous, like my directors, they're going to tell me, oh, I wrote that. So one of my directors told me, I gave you this feedback around you implemented system. You have some of the best systems, Stacy-Ann. You give us the right things for us to help get us off the ground and move things. But girl, you move so fast. And I want to say my biggest takeaway coming from AF, where everything moves so fast, and coming to such smaller network, such, familial network, to pace. I probably needed to pace some of my systems and some of the things that I was giving my directors. And I love their honesty and our relationship and them sharing that feedback with me. So I think that's one of the biggest things. One, I needed to spend less time listening last year because I not wasted, but I spent like 3 months listening. And when it was time to get to the work, I was like, oh my God, so much time has passed. So probably try to scale back the time I took to listen, because relationship building is important, and also learn the pace of where I am, learn a little bit more about the culture as opposed to like, okay, this is how fast I learn it. This is how fast you have to move because this is how I operated. Making sure that my end users were keeping up with me and understanding what I was giving them as opposed to just doling out all these things so fast. So I have to say this is fresh off the press that I got this back. So that is something that I will be thinking about, that I will share with someone else. Maybe slow down a little bit with all these wonderful systems that you're introducing.
Appreciate the honesty. Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely a good recommendation for sure. I think it's also so tempting to do when you come from a certain organization where you're used to, working at a certain pace, or you're used to, even little things. I think it's quick to forget that, we all had to learn those things at some point. Tina, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't know why, but you made me think about the first time I moved to America and I arrived in Indiana, in Bloomington. That's where I did my undergrad. And my expectation of Indiana's going to look just like California because that was the only experience of America I had. Boy, was I mistaken. I arrived in the middle of winter with snow and drove to Indiana, Bloomington, passing cornfields. I'm like, wait, what is this place, right? But I adapted, right? And I met Indiana and I fell in love with Indiana. And I think that it's the same way I feel about how I feel in my position right now. You got to meet people where they're at. I think coming from a bigger network like Uncommon and Achievement First, you do want to kind of run the race, right? And you want change to happen tomorrow, but change doesn't happen like that. You have to make change really meaningful. You have to get people to buy in. You have to get people to understand the why you want the change to happen. And so you got to meet them where they're at. And when you do meet them where they're at, that's when people buy in, and then people are going to do the work that's really meaningful for your network. So that's my advice. Meet them where they're at. Fall in love with Indiana.
All right. Very good. Maybe we'll change the title of the episode to Fall in Love with Indiana. And then that'll be the cliffhanger for listeners. Awesome. All right. Well, I know we're out of time here. So for others who found this conversation interesting or fascinating, who maybe want to learn more about Prospect Schools or connect with the two of you, where should they go? Where should we send them in our show notes?
For me, it'll be LinkedIn. My handle is @TinaDas.
Yep. Same for me. LinkedIn, it's Stacy-Ann Brissett.
Perfect. And then any other kind of quick tactical recommendations, whether that be books, resources, tools, Could just be put everything in Google Sheets. Could be I read this book and it changed my life. Anything specific that we can also include as kind of final recommendations?
For me, it would be Radical Candor is definitely a great book.
You took that one.
I also loved Atomic Habits. I thought it was a great book. It's a really good book for a leader trying to build leadership habits, I think, or even any habit. I really enjoyed Atomic Habits.
Okay.
And this podcast, Daniel, your podcast is awesome. I've learned so many things from your podcast. So, hey, listen to Daniel.
Do not listen to me. Listen to the guest. Yeah, listen to the guest.
This is a guest. Oh my God. For me, I would say stepping into leadership is I went from having my calendar so clear as a OC or a PA to 50 million things on my calendar. So the book Together Leader got me together in my leadership journey, staying organized and staying on top of the 50 million tasks. So I'd say do the Together Leader book or the training. The training is great as well. That also is a good use of tool for any leaders transitioning into a higher role or just going into leadership. The Together Leader is a gem.
Perfect. All right. We'll link to all of the recommendations in the show notes. Stacy-Ann and Tina, thank you so much for sharing your time and your transparent learnings and expertise, and really enjoyed the time today.
Thank you for having us, Daniel.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.